There's the sound. Hey everyone, and welcome to the stream. Thanks for joining. I am Coding It Wrong, aka Josh Justice to normal non-developers, and I'm really glad you're here. If you jump in, if you're on the chat, say hello. If you are watching a recording of this later, say hi to me on Reactiflex Discord or on Twitter at Coding It Wrong. Today we are jumping back into React Native for the first time in a little while. I am wearing my Chain React hat to celebrate. What we're going to be doing, we're actually going to be adding some detox end-to-end tests to React Native itself, and I'm super excited about this. Lorenzo from the React Native core team reached out to me recently and talked about the React Native team's desire to get some better detox test coverage of React Native itself. It's going to help the React Native team as they're making enhancements, including the Fabric project, to rewrite a number of the internals of React Native. Because they want the external behavior of the framework to be the same, end-to-end tests are going to be really valuable in that regard. And they actually have a little bit already. So today on the stream, we're going to try to work on adding in some more tests. I'm also going to be thinking through ways to put out requests so that the community can participate as well. Maybe even put together some training, some more official training on how to do these tests. But I'm glad you're here to check this out now, and let's learn it together. One quick note before we go, I sometimes mention that I work at Big Nerd Ranch. We are actually hiring right now, and so we work in mobile as well as web development, as well as the intersection of them, React Native. So if you're a JavaScript developer, iOS developer, Android developer, even if you're a Mac developer, we would love to talk to you. You can go to bignerdranch.com and see our careers page. We'd love to hear from you. You can ping me directly if you want to hear more about what it's like to work here. Okay, let's talk about how we can get set up with React Native to run these tests and what exactly it is that we're going to be testing. So the React Native lives at this GitHub repo, Facebook/React Native. That is React Native itself, and you can download it here. You can clone it down. So if we pull it up, we can see our project structure. And in here, we have this one app called RNTester. And so what this is, if you open this up and run it, you can run it from within Xcode or using normal detox commands. It's an app that lists out a bunch of the React Native components, and it just lets you kind of go in and interact with them, see them working. Yeah, there we go. Picker with prompt message. Or the button screen, for example. You can press them and see them working. You can load this onto your phone as well if you like. And so this is really good for manual testing, for them to be able to pull up and see how all these components are working as changes are made. However, like any other manual testing, it would be great to have an automated testing alternative as well. And so there are a few detox tests already in place for RNTester. So this is an interesting approach because nobody cares about the RNTester application itself, like it's trivial, but what we care about is the components themselves and if they really work. And so this is why it's great that Detox works from the outside in. It's interacting with your app just like a user would, and you can confirm that things are still working. I should show you the Detox page real quick. It's run by the Wix company, and it's a great framework for end-to-end testing for mobile apps in general, but especially and first and foremost for React Native. And so let's take a look at these detox tests we have here. At first there was just a button test, but then in the last few days they've added in a switch test as well. And so for this button test here, we go in. Let's take a look at the button screen. So these buttons show up on here. And so we go in, we say, first we're going to the button screen, and then we say, okay, find the button labeled press me. I'm going to tap it. And then we look for some text that says simple has been pressed. And we can see that that is on the screen in the form of the alert. So we're asserting that it's visible. And then we tap OK to get it to go away. So that's confirming that that button works, that it's tappable, and that something happens as a result. It's also incidentally testing the alert, but that's okay. The key here is that we want to make sure at least that the button itself works. And the switch tests are similar. So there's a few different commands. If you check in the package.json for React Native, you'll see, if you scroll down far enough through these things, you'll see some scripts as usual. And there's a script that says build iOS E2E and test iOS E2E. And so those make sense. They're actually running detox build and detox test. So you can run those, or you can run detox test directly. So we're going to do that in just a second. There is some setup for Android testing as well. Of course, Android is also important for React Native. But I've heard that the detox setup for Android is maybe not quite there yet. So we're going to be focusing on iOS for right now. So let's run these tests and see them work here. So we can run here detox test to run the whole suite. We're going to confirm that the existing ones are working, and then we're going to add in our new tests. We'll just take a second here because it's got to boot the thing up and everything like that. And again, if you're just joining in the stream, if you're here, I'd love for you to say hi in the chat room if you like. Love to interact with folks for questions or feedback or input while on the stream. So if you're here, say hello. So we see here, we ran through those button tests. I was talking while they happened, but over there, the sequence of events happened on the simulator here as Detox automated running through them and making sure that everything was working right. And now we can see it changing switches and confirming that they work. Lorenzo, hello! And there's Lorenzo from the React Native core team. Thanks so much for joining in. Feel free to give me input and thoughts and advice as we go. Sweet. So we ran through the two existing tests, test suites, the button test and the switch test. And so that's great. So let's go ahead and add a new one. Eli from the core team requested, I threw out a few options of components that I might like to test. The goal here is not to test the most different or most crazy component, but just kind of take one step at a time. So one of the things that's going to come up as we stream today, I'm going to be sharing my thoughts about how I think through this large existing code base, adding tests to it, and how I decide what to do first. So I suggested of the tests, the ones that seem like the most likely for me to be able to make pretty good progress on, things like tab bar, things like touchable, seem pretty straightforward. Text input had some more complex stuff going on, and things like displaying images. So there are ways with different testing tools to take screenshots. I think we found that that React Native's test suite actually has some screenshot tests involved. I haven't dug into that yet myself. So all I've looked into is Detox interaction testing. So that's what we're going to focus on here. So with Detox, there's not really a great way to say, well, at least the normal usage of Detox is not so much focusing on, here is an image of a certain kind that's showing up somewhere. Instead, it's focusing on interactions that the users do to tap buttons and type and swipe and, pan to kind of scroll. And then checking that things are shown. And it works through iOS and Android's accessibility APIs to get access to these elements. So this is going to, even if it doesn't confirm that everything's working, like you want to make sure things are 60 frames per second and smooth and don't flicker or anything like that, some of that may still require manual testing. But if we can cover things and catch basic interactivity with the automated tests, that's going to give us a higher degree of confidence. And when I say us, I mean the people that write React Native that know how to do that stuff, to be able to make changes and incorporate pull requests from the community to know that things are still working well. So when I mentioned to Eli, a core team member, about the components that I was thinking about testing today, he recommended touchable. You'll remember if you've been around React Native as much as I have, button was not always built in. Previously, it was just touchable, the abstract concept of a touchable. And that's still there and still very important. And so if we look at the touchable examples here, we can see that we have these buttons, and we tap for a highlight and a custom highlight. Tap here for no feedback, so there's no feedback on the button, but we get some output coming down here showing us that it happened. Some text that can be tapped. Scrolling could be interesting here to make sure that we can actually get this to show up properly. There's got force touching. I don't think that's going to work on the simulator. It hits slop. I'm not a GUI developer, so I'm not familiar with the concept of a slop, but that is apparently a thing. And then we have some disabled touchables and then some enabled ones that we can see as we click on them that things are happening. Cool. So it makes sense. Like, I mean, we've seen, even just looking at the button test, that we have a tap function that we can call to tap on things, and we can target things by label, and then we can check if things are visible on the screen. And so that makes sense that that's going to be something that we can test in a similar way for touchable. So let's just dig in and get this working. The first thing I want to do is just figure out, like, what's the simplest thing for me to test, because I'm new to the React Native code base and to RNTester, and so I want to get confidence that I'm doing things right. The first thing that I was doing to get confidence was just to run the existing test and confirm that they were passing, and they were, so that's great. So now let's add in a new test and kind of just get the basics in place to make sure it's working. So I'm going to make a new test. We'll follow the pattern, say touchable-test.js. And so let's take a look here at what's in the existing test to compare it. Can I put them side by side? That might be a little tight, but let's see. Yeah, I don't like that. Let's put them top to bottom, and let's hide the terminal for now. So first we have a Facebook copyright at the top. I am willing to go along with that. It can copyright my work. That's all good. I think we're going to get some warnings, presumably Flux or maybe ESLint, about this global not being there. So let's just run it to see that happens. I kind of gave this a test run recently just to make sure it would work, so I don't waste everybody's time on the screen. So we're going to have a usual describe block using touchable. I believe Facebook has the Detox test set up to run through Jest rather than through Mocha, and that is supported by Detox as well. That makes sense. Jest is by Facebook and is really cool, so we'll see how that goes. Okay, so before all, so check out this before all block. We want to follow the patterns of the existing test suite as much as we can. That's a good idea in any code base, or at least understand them so we know if and when we want to deviate. So we have a before all block here that's going to run before all of our tests. Then it's going to go into the Explorer search and type the text button. And then it's going to tap on this button, simple React Native button component. So we can see that this is the full label for this button or row right here, including the kind of the primary text and secondary text. And if you look at the switch text, the purpose of this will make a bit more sense. So the switch is not on the screen already. And Detox is aware of what is or isn't on the screen. And so I believe in general, it's not going to let you tap on something that can't be seen. And so this is partially probably why they've added this search box here. So when we type in switch, that's an easy way we can ascertain and assure that it's on the screen so we can tap on it. So rather than having to scroll down to an arbitrary point, we can just search for it and then type it in. So that's going to work fine for us as well. So let's say touchable test. And let's just kind of confirm how this works here. If we type in touchable star. So I saw this earlier. When I typed the closing tag, I'm not quite sure why that doesn't show up anymore. Is there a space? No. I'm not totally sure why that doesn't search. But that's okay. Like we just need to search for something to get it to come up. And so even if I wanted to come back and fix this later to make it more consistent, just searching for this touchable text is enough to get things working. So let's do that. So I'm just going to copy this over. So before all, and here's these warnings here, at least in my editor. Yeah, element is not defined. And so this global section here is going to define these variables for using detox and doing assertions and things like that. So we're going to find the Explorer search. And if you didn't know the ID from copy and pasting another test, you could look through the component source code to find out if it had an ID or a label or something like that. And we want to replace text. Looks like touchable star is going to be text that's going to make it work. And then we're going to search for the full text of this, which is touchable. And we'll see if this works. I think when I tested it, this works. Touchable and on press. Touchable and on press examples. So that's going to be the full label to tap on this to get it to come up. And then afterwards, we've got an after all block. And they've got a to-do in here about the fact that it looks like the test suite does not reset the app from scratch to go back to the main screen. So we have to actually tap on the back button label to go back to the main screen after each test. And because I certainly don't know any of the rationale that's gone into that, so even if I felt strongly about changing that right now, I'm going to leave that just to get the test passing as easily as possible and then consider refactoring at that time. So let's get one simple test in here as well to make sure that runs, because I'm not sure that Detox would actually run the before all and after all blocks unless we had something actually being tested. So let's see here. Let's go into Touchable and see. Okay, before it was called simple button should be tappable. And I think that actually referred, yeah, it was actually called simple button on the screen. So let's see here. Let's say touchable. Oh, was it touchable without feedback? Yeah, touchable without feedback should be tappable. And I don't usually I try to have my tests starting with it to kind of read as one sentence, but I'm okay with following the pattern here. So it's touchable without feedback. That's okay. And so here's the next question, like, why am I choosing this choice first? Well, right now, these two buttons here at the start, all they do when you tap on them is highlight the background color. And that's good to see, but it's not totally obvious for me how to test that. And so instead, following even just the pattern of the existing code, I can see that here, as I tap on this button, there's actually some text that shows up on the screen that I could easily assert it against. I remember on the PR from just a day or two ago for the switch test, the person actually changed what showed up on the screen for the switch test so that there was easier things to assert against. And so that's what we're going to do here. If you were in a real production app and there wasn't something easy to assert against, things could get trickier. But for here, having some clear text on the screen to assert against is going to be helpful. So I think we're gonna find that tapping on other things and changing them, we're going to want to change the shown visual feedback to make it better. Sorry for bumping the camera there. But for now, starting with touchable without feedback is going to be the easiest initial test for me to write, just to know that all the pieces are working together and that my test is going to work. So let's start with that. Touchable without feedback should be tappable. Create an arrow function here as usual. And so let's just kind of follow the pattern here. In fact, I'm just going to copy and paste them. All right, so we're going to await, oh, this is async. Very cool. So we're going to await element by label. And instead of press me, it says tap here for no feedback. And feedback here doesn't refer to the fact that, I mean, you get feedback in that something changes on the screen. The feedback they're referring to is that there's no visual change to the element you're tapping on. There's no background color change, no highlight. Okay, so tap here for no feedback. We tap on it, and let me go back and come back to see. By default, no content shows up on there. And then when we tap on it, it says, we have some text that says touchable without feedback on press. So we expect an element with touchable without feedback on press to be visible. Now we're getting a linter error. It's running prettier and it's saying there should be a line break. Oh, I didn't notice the fix icon before. I think I was in Visual Studio Code earlier today. I still can't commit to a text editor, so we're in Atom right now, so that's where we are. Let me click fix here. Cool, and it just added the line breaking for me. The line was just a bit too long, but it had a recommendation for how to do it. That's fine. Now in this case, there's no OK button for us to need to close. Back in the button test, that closed out an alert. And so here, there's nothing else to do. We just want to run this expectation to make sure it's visible. So with this, we should be good. One other thing is that, running these two other tests is a little bit long. And so I'd prefer not to do that. And so I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to skip the button test, and I'm going to skip the touchable test. Of course, that wouldn't be very, once you get like dozens of tests in here, just running skip on them won't be the most efficient thing in the world. But for now, that works well. I'm more used to working in Mocha than in Jest, and I know there's a dot only that you can run to just run a single test. But because of the way Jest does things in parallel, it wasn't working for me immediately when I was working on this earlier today. So .skip I think works for now. So that's good enough for today. So let's give this a run, detox test, and see if it works. Lorenzo says, why did you switch from code to Atom? I'm going back and forth constantly lately. So I've run into a few situations recently where Visual Studio Code it's growing towards becoming an IDE, and it may very well have found a nice in-between point between an IDE and a text editor. But there's some automatic behavior that it does or that can get enabled within it that was causing problems for me. And I started to feel like I had back in the IDE days where something was happening and I didn't know why, and it was taking me work to be able to kind of turn it off. Whereas I would just prefer if I was in a text editor that didn't have that functionality in the first place. So that's why I'm in Atom at the moment, why I have it in the mix. At the same time, when I do Vue.js for my current client project, Visual Studio Code has some great Vue.js extensions, and so those work a lot better in there for like syntax highlighting and code completion and things like that. So currently I'm going back and forth between Atom, Visual Studio Code, and even Sublime I downloaded last week. So just to kind of get a feel for the differences. Eli says, Eli, who has joined from React Native team, I had to move all the files I wasn't testing to a different folder to be able to only run a single file. Gotcha. So yeah, this is something that I will keep an eye on as well, and maybe we can reach out to the Wix team, or I can experiment some to see if we can find a good workflow for working on these things. That'll be great to be able to recommend to community members as well, so that they can make changes and work very productively without having to be an expert on Jest or Detox or anything like that. So I've been talking here, so let's see if the test worked. Cool. Well, our switch test ran, so I think I disabled the touchable test that I add instead. That's because I have it open in two tabs. So let's pay attention. Disable switch, disable button, enable touchable. Let's rerun it again and see if it worked this time. So with testing in general, and certainly with test-driven development as well, not that we're doing here, it's good to work on one thing at a time. And right now what I'm working on is to answer the question, can I add a test that works? And it looks like it succeeded. Touchable without feedback should be tappable, succeeded. I do like to make sure I get a red test as well to make sure that it'll correctly detect if it fails. So let's say if I detect some wrong text here, let's make sure it'll error out. I can't imagine Detox not doing this right, but I always assume that I could be doing something wrong, and so it's good to check that. Because it sucks to be at a point where your app is breaking and your tests are passing and you thought everything was fine. Okay, we got a big long error. Here we go. It's a lot of detail, a big stack trace there. Goodness gracious. Wow, okay, all right. Here we go. There we go. Okay, so back at the top it says, assertion criteria. So failed with assertion. Matcher for sufficiently divisible. So we were looking for something that was visible, and we looked for if it had the text touchable without feedback on press lulls. And then it failed and blew up a core dump almost with a lot of information here. So this is great. This is showing that my test will fail if I'm looking for the wrong test, or the wrong text. And so let's rerun it to make sure it is in fact passing. Then I'm going to make a quick commit on here. I don't think I've made a branch yet, so I'll stick up a branch with this on it, and then we'll keep going from there. Cool, so that succeeded. I could wait for the button test still kind of gets kicked off, and then it just skips any of the tests on it. So I'm just gonna kind of quit those out for now. I could also just delete the file and make sure I don't commit that to the code base. That would be unfortunate if I did that. Okay, so it looks like some generated files are changed as well. But yeah, what we want to add. Oh yeah, I am on a touchable test branch. Let me make sure I'm up to date with master and things like that. All right, so let's add. Yeah, just this new file. First touchable test. And this is certainly something, maybe I'll squash these commits down before I push up the PR, or maybe not, but certainly if I've got something working and I'm working in a code base that I'm unfamiliar with, I'm gonna go ahead and commit it for safety. So that'll be good. All right, so let's go into Touchable here. And you see that when you're using Detox for tests, the app will just stay up over to the side so you can just manually interact and see what's going on. So I think next, we've got existing functionality here and we just want to cover it. And so I love the snowball approach, like start small and build up momentum from there. And so I think I'm just going to go through and like change one thing at a time. Whatever's easiest to test, let me add that first. Partially because like writing a test for something working is pretty clear cut. Whereas, adding functionality to get it to show some feedback on the screen that something changed, like that takes a little more thought. There could be some different ways to do it. So I'm going to test the things that are easiest to test first. So, as I mentioned before, testing this custom highlight, that will take a little working. I might not end up even actually testing the highlight itself. I might just add some textual feedback on the screen that the tap worked. So here we go, text with highlight. Text has built-in on-press handling. And that's working. So that's going to be very testable. So let me go check and see what this is doing. I'm actually kind of curious to dig into the functionality. And I'll show you where the code lives for RNTester. Sorry, the sidebar text is a little bit small on the stream here. So if we go under RNTester, if we go under JS, this is going to be all our components, and they're mostly all directly there. And I think they're kind of mostly named based on what they're testing, as you might imagine. So we have touchable example, and here we are. Eli says, feel free to change any of the examples to make it easier to detect via test. Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Yeah, it was great that a few of y'all from the React Native core team have done in PRs recently to set a good example for me. And it occurs to me that it could be cool to link to those for future contributors so they can see the kind of things that are in there. Like, the exact nature of this example is not set in stone. And it's cool that y'all are encouraging changes to improve testability and help with that. So that'll be a great thing to show to other contributors because it's definitely been helpful for me. Cool, so we have our touchable example here. Let's take a look. Let's just hide the console for a moment and see what's going on. So exports examples. Let's see here. Yeah, so it looks like this is some kind of structure. It might be, y'all that are in React Native day-to-day may be able to parse this a little more easily, but it looks like this is a data structure that's going to be automatically rendered out into this kind of format here so that the implementation details of these sections aren't repeated through all these screens. So that's kind of nice. So here's touchable highlight with a little info. That's cool. There's a little bit of a paragraph of explanation here to what's happening. Touchable without feedback is there. It links to another component, so that's cool. All right, touchable native feedback with animated child. I think this is Android specific, right? So it's not showing up here on iOS. This reminds me, I will probably need to Lorenzo and Eli, to figure out if I need to run Android tests here locally before this PR gets merged or what. So we can look into that offline, or I can kind of investigate there. But another thing for my process, as I often hear is the case in React Native, let me build something out on one platform first, and then hopefully soon, if I remember, I'll check it on the other platform to make sure it's covered as well. Okay, so here's the text test that I want to test, and it is sending back a text on press box component. So that's what I want to look into to find out what I can interact with here in the test. And here's that component further down in that file. We're rendering it out. We have the text. It has a style, and it has an on-press. So this is what they were getting at, that the text component itself has an on-press prop built in that you don't have to wrap it in a touchable. Eli says, the detox tests for React Native currently aren't running on Android. That hasn't got set up yet. Gotcha. Cool. All right. Well, this works great with my propensity to start with one platform at a time. So hopefully I won't make things much harder for Android as we go. We'll see what happens with that. But so okay, we have a text component. It has an onPress, and we could probably look up the text based on the text that's in it, or we can add an ID. So just for the sake of variety, even if we decide to add an ID later, let me see if I can highlight this text based on what we have, just with the contents of it, the textual contents of it. So let's put maybe the example at the top and the test at the bottom. Okay, so text should be tappable. That seems like a good, simple way to summarize, because I think this is the only text on this screen. When choosing test names, I try to kind of distinguish which other things that are happening. Yeah, so this is the only example on this screen that specifically relates to text. So I don't feel the need to repeat all of this heading. This is just enough to distinguish this test from the rest of the it blocks in this test suite. All right, so I'm going to get this element. And the detox documents are really great. So if you go to wix/detox, you could go into here, go into their documentation, and it'll describe all the assertions and matchers you can use and things like that. All right, so element by text. You see that in the assertion here, we were finding an element by text and then making sure it was visible. We can use element by text, probably, we'll find out in a second, to pull it up in order to interact with it as well. So the text we're looking for is text has built-in onPress handling. And we're going to do a tap on that. And then let me go back out of the screen and come back again to see. Text onPress is what it says. Text onPress. Expect this to be visible. Oh, and Prettier is actually saying this should be on one line because it's short enough, so we'll just fix that. I have not fully bought into Prettier yet. It fits with my point of view of standards, but honestly, I was using decorators on an Ember.js project and I didn't like how it formatted them, and so I instantly pieced out. I just rage quit Prettier at that time. So, but it seems really good. So I'm looking forward to a project not using decorators that I could use Prettier on to get used to it. Cool. So one thing before I forget, you'll notice this test is not going to fully cover the behavior of this example. If you tap on it several times, we get 2x and 6x kind of shown there. And so you might be wondering, like, should I test that? Should I not worry about it? So I think it depends. So if you're in a production application and the fact that this number shows up is important for your app, I would definitely say you should test it, either at an end-to-end level or component test level. In this case, that's in there just so you can continue to see that continuing to tap detects it multiple times. I suppose, and again, the folks on the stream might tell me if that's super crucial to test, but at my initial glance, at least for right now, thinking about what's the highest value test to add first, I want to confirm that the onPress works at least once. And then from there, I'm going to go on, and the next most high value thing to me seems to be looking at the other examples on this page to see what I can add tests for. But if they or I decide that, I want to make sure that double tapping it is detected twice and leads to a 2x, then we could add a test for that case as well. So this is really a pragmatic approach of just what's the most high value test to add next. And of course, if you're doing test-driven development, you wouldn't add that production code behavior until you had added the test for it. All right, so this might work. So to love that level of certainty. This is all an experiment that we're doing together. Get back up to that test command, just Detox-Test. We'll run it. Cool. Eli says, RNTester has only ever been used for manual testing. We can change anything for being useful for automated testing. That's cool. That was the theory that I had for RNTester, so I'm glad that I didn't lie and make something up when I was saying that it was used for manual testing. Cool. Yeah, it'll be great to be able to use it for both and. Okay, so text should be tappable is passing. And I have enough confidence about this and how it's working that I don't feel a strong need to change it to break it or anything like that. So that feels good. So let's just add, for now, I'm going to continue to add like just one commit per test. Use my little git shortcut here to review the changes. So the only change I'm adding is that new test. Add test for tappable text. We'll add that in. All right, so it seems like I've broken my app, or the simulator itself. It seems is what happened. So let's run that again to get it up. You can run your app in the normal way as well. I think depending on how you have the Detox simulator settings set up, Lately for me, Detox has been opening up in a different iOS simulator than when I run the app directly, and so that's been nice to actually have Detox running in one simulator and like my dev like play version of it in another one. That way I can preserve the state that I was in before if I want to, if I feel like it. All right, so we're gonna wait for this test to complete. Which I think I just need to force quit it in the middle of once it's up on the screen. Yeah, okay, there we go. We force quit it. Sweet, so let's see what else we can test. All right, so we're going to come back to this one with where we don't have feedback yet. Let's just see if there's any other interesting ones before we come back to that. Touchable feedback events. So this is showing multiple events that happen. If you long press, it'll show as long press and then press out. So this is cool. I mean, this is helpful for me who has only ever done trivial stuff with tappable elements in React Native to see how that sequence of different events happens. So we can certainly test this to make sure that at least the press and the press in happen. And that would have value to ensure that both of those events occur. There might be a long press in Detox. I forget. So let's give that a try to see. Because again, this is kind of covering some more of the details of the interaction and how it works. To be able to, for the React Native team to be able to ensure that this doesn't break in the future. And again, all these things are useful for your app as well. We're testing how these components are implemented right now in a trivial example app. You could test that the components you're using are behaving the way you want. So that if you replace an out-of-the-box component with a UI libraries component or something like that, that you know if it fails. So a lot of these principles would apply to your own React Native app as well. So let's say here, touchable feedback events should return as expected. That's kind of a general test description, but I'm okay with that for now, unless I get code review feedback otherwise. Eli has links about long press. Thank you. He's got my back. This is great. This is pair live coding. This is awesome. Okay, cool. So looking through this sequence one more time. So let's try, just to try the initial thing here, we'll try one press, one tap, and confirm that we get press, and press in. So let's see how that works. We're going to get the element that says, okay, so press me. So that's probably not going to work because I think we have two press me's on the screen. So let's see if Detox errors out, or maybe it chooses the first one by default. Let me make a to-do. There are multiple press me's, so probably fragile. But I want to run it just to see what happens. And so then we're going to confirm the text, and so presumably there's actually a line break in this text box between press and press in. I'm not totally sure. We could dig into the implementation, but let's just see what happens here. If I say press, this is going to be the most readable thing in the world. Actually, I think in JavaScript I can do a /n press in. I think I can do a /in, and that syntax highlighting is suggesting to me that I can. In other languages, single quotes might mean that this is just a /n and not a line break character. So let's see if this works. And I wonder if, yeah, this will be good. All right. At some point, we may have so many tests in here that we prefer just to run one at a time. I'm curious, Eli, if you have, if you ran into a situation where you wanted to only run one test within the test suite, if you did skips or onlys or what helped there. So let me know if you think. Otherwise, we'll figure it out together. And Eli says that he highly recommends adding test IDs. That is the way I like to test as well. So we will go with that. Cool. Multiple UI elements match for the given criteria. So this is great. I actually wasn't 100% sure that Detox was going to fail on this. I think in some testing frameworks I've used, if it finds multiple elements, it'll just interact with the first one. But this is good because this ensures that it's not going to be too unreliable to work with it. It only works, he says. Cool. All right. So we'll put only on there just to save us a little bit of time. So now let's go in and add a test ID. And this is great for testing in general, especially if you're adding tests into an existing code base. And I think this will be helpful for future contributors to the RNTester code base. So we want some kind of test ID. We're okay with this saying press me. But what's great is to be able to say, and he's going to jump in because I'm not in this day-to-day, if it's by ID, if that's the test ID. In fact, I'm going to check the Detox docs and see if I can get there before he does. Let's see here. Matchers. Test ID. Yeah, there we go. So if we use a test ID prop, that adds, at least on iOS, that's implemented as the iOS accessibility ID, but then that's available to pull up elements by ID, element by ID. So that's what we're going to do here. So we have a component that works fine on its own, but we want to add a test ID to be able to select it. So let's see how that, yeah, he had a little underscore there. So for the ID, we'll say here, touchable feedback events button. So we'll call it touchable feedback events button. That's the ID we want to add. So now we just need to find where in here to add it. So a touchable example, we'll scroll back down again. I guess we should see feedback events, search on the screen. Touchable feedback events is the name of the component that's in. So we go down here and then, oh, there we go. It does already have a test ID. So in the touchable feedback events, we see that there's a test ID called touchable feedback events button. So that's great. We can use it already. And then as a test ID, that's not used for anything other than testing. So we have an ID there to tap. So let's rerun the test and see what happens. When it comes to tests like this, certainly when I'm doing TDD, but also testing after, I don't feel the need to spend a whole lot of time thinking through, let me set up the test perfectly and make sure that I'm sure that this test will pass. Like, it's okay if your test errors out. So we can run it, see if matching by the text this way works, and we can change it if necessary. So we scroll back up. Know that adjust element properties so that it matches the failed constraints. Okay, so this is just saying cannot perform action due to constraints failure. Oh, you know, this is probably not on the screen. Okay, so it found touchable feedback events button. Failed constraints is interactable. So it seems like that might mean that it's not on the screen, but that also might be an iOS setting that means that it can't be interacted with for some reason. I remember seeing when I've done native iOS development, I feel like there's been settings on the side about that. So let's check and see. I mean, clearly it is like literally interactable in the UI, but the fact that it's off the screen is making me nervous that might be what's going on. So let's see if there's any settings here. We have accessibility label, accessibility role, touchable opacity, and I think we've tested touchable opacity before. Touchable without feedback. Let's see here, back at the top here, touchable without feedback. I guess it would be touchable highlight is what we had before. Disable true. Touchable opacity. Yeah. So in these other components, I don't see anything in particular that needs to be done to make them interactable. And so I assume that this, my first guess on this feedback is that Detox is not liking the fact that it's off the screen. And so we need to interact with that a bit. So those who are on the chat, if you have thoughts on the easiest way to automatically scroll down to here, we can give that a try. But in the meantime, if I do not hear back from you, let's check Detox's docs. I have not used Detox on a production project before, so I haven't had the need to do this scrolling and run into edge cases like this. So let's see. I mean, I know there's a way to tap and drag and things like that. I see long press there. He mentioned that. Scroll to. That looks tempting. Scroll to edge. So it looks like this is saying find an element and scroll that element to be at the bottom or at the top. And so that would be great. So that would actually let it ensure that it was on the screen. So let's try that. Let's go. So, since I'm going to need this element twice, let's save it into a variable. Button equals that, and then let's say button scroll to top. Now this might be wrong, so let's find out. There's also a scroll amount of pixels, so we can try that in a moment. Maybe I need to kind of have the container that's being scrolled selected here, but I don't know, so we're going to find out. So we get the button, we attempt to scroll it to the top of the view, and then we attempt to tap it. So let's give this a try and see. It's all about experimentation here. We're going to let this run. Eli says, Rick and I dislike scrolling because if the scroll starts on a nested scroll view, it will scroll that instead. Rick ran into that on a picker. We will probably want to add a test filter to the top of all pages. Do whatever you want to unblock for yourself for now, though. Yeah, and that's a great way to say the philosophy I was applying before, where it's like, hey, let me get the basics in, and even potentially adding in a to-do like this if there's something I want to come back and change, but this will at least kind of let me move forward. So what is happening here? I feel like it's oh yeah, the after test is taking me back out. Cannot find element. Huh. So let me watch this run again to see if I can follow what's happening, to see if the scroll happens or what, because that test output isn't making it totally obvious. But yeah, that's cool. This is another. I'm going to save these chat logs and make a list. Maybe we can put these in GitHub issues or track them somehow for us or other contributors to jump in. I was talking again when I was supposed to be looking, so let's actually look this time. I'm gonna have a moment of silence here while I look at what's going on in this test. I was about to start talking, but I'm not going to do that. It was not clear that it scrolled. So let me actually, I'm going to disable the after all right now, because I don't want to be taken off of that screen. And maybe this will just kind of help me see where we got to. And I'm definitely, in my test, temporarily adding log statements, commenting things out as I go through the test. Even if I'm not going to commit it, if it helps me in my testing process, I'll do it. Okay, so scrolling down to it does not seem to have been the case. So instead, let's say, okay, scroll 100 down. So element by ID scroll. Oh, yeah, well, obviously, I'm looking at element by ID scroll view. So that's what I need to be indicating instead of the button itself. And then scroll to, it scrolls to the bottom to the top. Okay, so I don't want to scroll the button. So let's put that back down here, and then let's figure out for now what we can do to scroll down to there. So we want to see the scrollable view that we're inside. And this, if this is abstracted away within a reusable thing, that could actually be a little challenging. Let's see. So that's not coming up. Let's see what this is. So we can actually trace this back and see what touchable element is within. Or I might give up and go back to the touchable highlight to see what I can do there. That might be more productive. So let's give this just a minute or two, and then I'll go back to touchable highlight and see what we do. So Eli, feel free to save me. Do I use detox reuse when iterating on the tests? I do that in general for my personal projects. There was one time when I was getting up to speed on RNTester where it seemed like that did not do what I expected. I forget. So I had that off. But yeah, for those on the stream, detox with the reuse flag or -R will avoid reloading the iOS application onto the simulator. So that'll save you some time. Let me actually put that in my history here so I don't forget. Detox test -R. I can unblock myself by temporarily rearranging the example so I don't have to scroll. That's two. That's true. Okay, cool. I'm not going to commit that change in just because I prefer not to do that at this point. But thank you for the brainstorm. Let's do it. So, yep. And so the test ran again. And it got the same big block text. Desired element was not found. What am I saying here? Is that the error? I'm not sure. But let's go back to where we were at. Yeah, button. So we don't want button scroll to. So let's take that out, and instead let's temporarily rearrange this. So I think it's exports.examples has the order we're in. So touchable highlight we don't need right now. So let's cut that and move it down below touchable feedback events. So I'm going to just manually yeah, I guess maybe running the test is going to be the easiest. Can I do the shake? Where's my shake? Do my shake gesture. Oh, maybe that's not enabled right now. So it may be easiest for me just to do detox test -R to rerun it. Okay, so that seems to have not put in the updated code here. So I wonder if I need not reuse at this point to load in that production code. That's surprising. I mean, this may be I may have built this in a different way. I haven't done enough production use of detox to know kind of the build process that it runs through. So touchable highlight is still at the top. That's really surprising. Touchable feedbacks is there. What have I done? So in examples, touchable without feedback. Am I running? I'm actually not sure where exactly I'm running the app. I may have built it and not being serving it out of the running React Native app. May I have to use detox build. Let's do detox build. Let me try one thing first, because I think whether I do that or not, I mean, let me talk it back to a React Native core team member. I think I'm probably going to need a yarn start regardless, because there's nothing, I don't see in my doc here anything coming up. Cool. Yeah, that detox build C iOS sim release. I think is in, yeah, that's in the package.json. Let me go ahead and get that started as well. It seemed to have, I was able to get it running at least, just running detox build by itself. And so maybe that one is the default, or maybe there's some extra settings around where the content is being pulled from here. Cool, so the bundler is loading up. Metro is just about ready to go. I think this may have built in a mode where it was not checking for changes in the production JavaScript files. It just built them in once and was set to go. My antivirus acts up sometimes, so we're just going to force quit that. That's a thing I do. It's become my biggest theme on the live stream here is force quitting my antivirus. Okay. So that is set and ready to go. All right. This build could take a little while. In the meantime, let's think ahead. Let's use up some time by what we might want to do here. Let's pseudocode this. So in here, we might want to say, do a long press. So after we do the regular tap, and we do check that the expected text is visible, we might want to do a long press and then check that more events are visible in the right order. A lot of times I would separate out different sets of actions and responses into different tests. I might not here from a performance standpoint, just in terms of the order that the way end-to-end tests run and the overhead of kind of restarting them and things like that. So we'll try that. The other thing I'll talk about briefly here is what to do about these buttons up here, tapping for a custom highlight. Let's take a look at the production code here to see what those are actually doing. So in touchable example here, this is the code that I copied down. Touchable highlight. So we have a touchable highlight element with a style and an on press. It's for an image. And then here's a style. It has an underlay, so I think this might be the custom highlight color, maybe not. And there's the on press. So really this is the touchable highlight component itself, and so that is a different component. So we would certainly want to cover that component to make sure it's tested. And so I think what I would do here to test this, like, yes, ideally, like, you'd be able to find a way to test this highlighting that's happening here. But in the meantime, I think the most obvious thing that we could test with Detox is to be able to go in here for the touchable highlight and add some output on the screen that shows us that the tap was recognized, instead of just a console log statement. A console log is something you could potentially stub out with jest mocks in a component test, but in an end-to-end test, we want something that's actually visible that we can see. So let's see how we did that elsewhere. So looking here about touchable without feedback, let's look in that component. Yeah, so this component has a state of number of times pressed. And then it has a render method where it figures out what the text is that should show up in the log. And then it just renders the touchable without feedback, and it renders the text in here. And we have a log box style that we can use. And so probably what I'm going to do is set up the touchable highlight test to work similarly. Like, we'll just add this log box in there, and we'll add this state to be able to keep track of how many times it's tapped, and we'll add this content here to choose the content of the string so we can see it. Okay, so our build has finished, and so let's do detox test. And I'm pretty sure we're not going to want to run reuse here because we don't want to reuse it. We want to reload in the new build that's happened here. And once that's in, then we could use detox test reload in the future to make sure it keeps happening. Keeps using the same version without needing to update it. Sweet, so there we go. So our production code has been updated. We could play around in a second to see if changes that we make happen in real time, but we can see that touchable feedback events was tapped on. So now let's see the error that happened here. Maybe this is detecting the text is not quite the way we want it to. I really need a co-pilot on my streams more often to get me unblocked. I appreciate the random guests who have gotten me unblocked in the past. Cannot find UI element. So we're looking for the element that has text press in, and that's not being found. And so I think what I might do in this case, and this is something that I do in other test frameworks as well, instead of trying to find it by the text, even if I want to do that in the long term, what I might do now is find that element by ID and then check the text content of it to see what it is. and then get feedback that way. So let's look at our touchable test here. Touchable feedback event button. Let's get down to the button. We have the touchable feedback events console. There we go. So let's try this instead. Let's say expect element by ID, touchable feedback events console. And so now let's look at the assertion that we can run, or the the expectation that we can run on this to find out the text content of it. So that's going to be back in expectations to have text. Expect element by ID to have text. And so I think this might give us a more useful error message in this case, in that it actually will tell us, hey, I found that element and it didn't have this text, it had that text. And that can be useful. That could be useful long term as well for just test feedback for if the test breaks under changes in the future. So thinking about the useful error feedback from tests is a really good thing to have. So it's to have text. Press in. And it will tell us, hopefully, if that's not the most useful text, what to do. And Prettier wants that to be on another line, so that's fine. And we'll rerun this test. Oh, and I could have run Detox-Test-R this time, so I'll try to do that next time. A quick feedback loop is definitely important for testing purposes, especially for test during development, but even for test after development like we're doing here. Okay, it looks like that passed actually. So testing it this way, it was able to find it, whereas element by text was not apparently able to find those multiple line breaks. But when we found the element by ID and then checked the text in it, we were good to go. So that's really cool. It's very exciting. So this test is going to work here. Let's see. We usually try to keep the stream to an hour. I've got 9 more minutes. So let's see if we can get this long press in. Okay, this looks like I have messed things up. So we're going to rerun Detox test from scratch to get it loaded into the simulator okay. So let's look up those long press docs. I know Eli sent them to me just now, but I'm just going to not. I think it might not be clickable in the chat logs there. Just .long press instead of .tap. So that's easy enough. All right, so now long press. So this, I seem to have messed up the state of the simulator. So let's see if I can just get back out. I'm afraid to, I don't know what's in my background behind it, so I'm afraid to just start it. But let's restart it and see if it runs there. And while we're thinking about that, oh, we're fine. I can close it. Oh, it was just about to start working again. But regardless, I can run Detox-Test again. So we've got a long press that's happened, and so while this is booting up, I'm gonna work on this test again. And so now we're gonna see the text that it has. Now I think this is gonna have the text that I already had from last time already. I think those get pushed down. So I think it's gonna be press out. I'm just gonna guess on this because I don't know the life cycle that well. I think it was like a long press and then a press out. There might even be another press though. Okay, cool. So that came up. It's gone down, but it'll come back in a second. Yeah, it does seem like, at least for now, deleting out those tests would be productive to be able to avoid having to restart everything here. So cool. Oh, and the switch test has now closed it again. So yeah, this is the sequence we want to have. And then we'll think about here if we'd like this to be separate tests or not. When each of these examples listed out has just kind of one thing effectively to test within it, then it gets very simple because you just test that one thing. But when there's like several behaviors within one example block here, it can be a bit trickier. So let's see here. I'm going to test it manually here because this is existing code and I want to see it. So if I press in and out, it says press in and then press. If I press and hold, it says press in and then long press and then press out. So this could certainly be reorganized, maybe with like a template string to get it on multiple lines. But again, let's just kind of run it first to see if it passes as is. And then we could think about refactoring the test at that point. You know, it's good to think about one thing at a time. Like before we think about what's the optimal way that we could set it up and changing that as well, like let's see if we can get the test to succeed. And this is great. We could actually see it there. Well, it did what we wanted to, but the assertion didn't seem to have succeeded. So let's scroll back up and see what happened there. I was about to say that everything was going great, And then it clearly did not. All right. Can't find UI. Replace with text touchable. Is that Lorenzo back again with a second name? The chat will actually be preserved if you want to on the Twitch recording, so I can send that to you afterwards. That's funny. Okay, replace with text touchable. I think this is like trying to rerun the test at the end there. Where is this in the sequence? This is interesting. This is in the before all. Is this because I commented out the after all? Yes, because I commented out the after all, and so it's not gone back to the main screen. Yeah, thanks, Eli. Perfect. Yeah, so even though those are skipped, that's still what's happening there. Cool. So I think we got past this test itself, that it succeeded. Yeah, I wasn't sure the best way to summarize it, but it's trying to set the text in the filter. Okay, so it's gone back again, so now something else is errored out. I wonder about the timing of this. I wonder why this is failing. This is sort of like an internal mechanism here. Like clearly, is it because of the only? Interesting. I'm not sure quite why this is failing. We don't need to get this fixed on the screen. This is kind of wrap up stuff to make sure that everything is going. Maybe I'll take off the only here just to see. Kind of moving back towards like kind of a holistic test run here. We're still skipping button and switch, but now we're running the whole touchable test. So let's try that and see. Yeah, okay. So there was something small about the statefulness. It didn't work out, but that's okay. So now our touchable tests have all succeeded. So touchable without feedback should be tappable, text should be tappable, and touchable feedback event should return as expected. So I've got a little work to do. I mean, certainly I want to test the rest of this that I can before I push it up, but I want to work on the scrolling situation and see what I can do about that. It could be that I decide just to push up a few of these tests first to get one PR in, partially to stake my ground so that nobody else accidentally starts writing tests for touchable. But even if I'm able to, refactoring the scrollability to get that working could be a significant chunk of work. And so it would be nice to get these tests in, to get them covered, and to get that merged in before we move on. So this could be one PR that I put up. Adjusting the scrollability to make the test easier to do could be another PR. And then another PR could start to get into more complex situations. Well, maybe a third PR would be to cover other simple tapping and looking at feedback on the screen. And then I might wait until another PR to do more complex stuff, like figuring out what I might do around how to test visuals, if there's something that I can do within Detox to do that, and think about those more complex situations. So I guess that's a big general theme that comes to mind for me when it comes to testing advice. Adding tests to an existing system would be to go in, see what's easiest to test first, look what's highest value for lowest cost, and then iterate on it. You won't be able to get full 100% test coverage for an existing system right away, at least. But kind of work in small units, celebrate those successes, but also get those changes merged in so that they don't hang out and languish. And definitely get them in there and protecting your code. I'm going to check and see what other people said on chat. Hotem from... I forget if I rolled my R well there. I don't remember he said that I did it well when I met him at Chain React Conference this year. But he's on here, and so thanks for saying hey. Check back on the recording afterwards if you want to kind of catch up. I think it work now because you started the run on the previous screen. Yeah, there's some statefulness here. I mentioned maybe when you're on the stream or maybe not, the fact that it says we have this to do, remove app state persistency. Till then, we must go back to the main screen. So it's more typical in default detox tests to have a command, I forget what it is, that says like reset simulator or reset React Native. And so that's going to start you from scratch each time. And so I don't have the background around why this app state persistency was in here, but since it's not the default, I'm sure it's in there for a reason. And so even that would be another great example of something that I wouldn't want to mess with at the time. This is just a great illustration. You can run into this in your company's application code as well, where something goes wrong and then you make more changes. And then something else goes wrong and you make more and more changes over time. So it's best to back up when something goes wrong and unblock yourself, as Eli said, to make small changes, get those to a stable landing point, and then move on to something new from there. And I think we're at a fairly stable landing point from here. Again, I would prefer not to reorder the touchable examples if I can. And so I'm going to think about that as far as what I want to push up in a PR here to see what I can get up. And I'll do some more work. But I want to thank everyone who joined on the stream and everyone who checks out the recording afterwards. Eli has chimed in with some details. The reason for persistence is because nobody has thought about automated testing. Eli has some compliments about the stream. So thank you so much for joining, Eli. I appreciate it. I expressed some vulnerability in Discord earlier about nervousness about him joining, but I'm glad that he joined and maybe accounted for my nervousness there. So I appreciate it. Cool. I'm looking forward to working more on these tests myself. Maybe we'll do this on a future live stream, as well as working with the team to think about what we can do to enable others in the community to contribute these tests to React Native. It's a lot of fun. It's a big payoff to help the React Native team in the future and to help protect our apps from regressions that might happen in future React Native versions. So thanks everyone for joining, and I'm looking forward to what we do next time. Now let's go to the slide. See ya.